And we're going to get started. This is not the first time Chuck has done a presentation on McKinley, but it's the first time we're doing it. So it just fits into the timeline. We're kind of rolling right along, and we hit, I think, I would say one of your favorite presidents.
It is. He is. Yeah, he is.
So I'm going to start from the beginning, and we are going to get into McKinley. Before we do that, I just want to tell you, full disclosure, this is my brother. That's why we're talking so familiarly. And he is, we both are natives of Clifton, New Jersey. And Chuck is a graduate of New Mexico Highlands University with a degree in history. That's in, not to be confused with Las Vegas, Nevada. That's in Las Vegas, New Mexico. I always forget that. He is a presidential historian. He's a huge fan of McKinley and really has studied McKinley. So I think you're going to enjoy this. And McKinley's not, I don't know, there's sort of a strange cult following of McKinley, which we'll find out about. But Chuck is also a blueberry farmer and a mushroom hunter. And he is coming to us from Bandon, Oregon, which is where he's lived for the past, how many years? 20 years, 25 years?
About 23, yeah.
Yeah, okay, something like that, yeah. So we're going to talk today about McKinley. I'm going to ask that everybody keeps their devices muted. We're going to have time for questions at the end. You know, we do have a little bit of wiggle room on the other side. So if we run over, it's not the end of the world, but we really do want to answer your questions and have our usually lively discussion afterwards. So let's get started. Welcome, Chuck.
Thanks, Michelle. Good to be here with you and everyone else. And this is a real pleasure for me to share the story of William McKinley. Not that the other presidents didn't fascinate me to do the research, but this is someone who I've spent a little more time with. I did a college thesis on his administration, so it's a little more familiar, the story here. And there's some side stories I'm going to have fun sharing with you about his life and times. So let's get rolling here with number 25, William McKinley. His origins go back to Ireland. They've done some very good genealogy with the McKinley lines and found this photograph from the ancestral McKinley homestead in Northern Ireland. This is in Antrim County near Dervock. The name of the farm is the Conager Farm, and there are, at this point at least, there were several buildings still standing going back to the 1600s. There's evidence also that an ancestor of McKinley, a great granduncle, I believe, was executed as a Irish rebel rouser, was executed in front of the town at the town square near this location. And the execution was performed by none other than the future financial backer of William McKinley, Mark Hanna's relative, a great relative of Mark Hanna. So the relatives had their encounter, and then Hanna and McKinley will meet again in the future. But this is the origin of the McKinley story. And we move on to the father, William Sr. He was born in Pennsylvania and was a foundry owner, an iron foundry owner in several locations. Was a very stern and strict father with the kids. McKinley had 7 siblings, mostly older. I think one sibling was younger. He was near the end of the line there. But McKinley was a very strong local businessman until troubles hit his industry. Was very active in local politics as a Whig and later Republican, and lived long enough to see his son inducted as governor of Ohio. So that's the legacy behind the man McKinley. And we get to see a photo now, I believe, of the young William McKinley. Now, I have never seen this photo until this moment. This is something Michelle came up with. So baby Billy. Wow, it really could be any kid, but we'll go with McKinley. I can see him he's got that stare going there. Lovely little dress there. And again, a happy childhood by all means. Was loved by his siblings, had mostly sisters. I think he had two brothers and four sisters, and was a beloved a younger child in the family, was well schooled, and was born into a strong Methodist home, which he continued to adhere to the rest of his life. So there's baby Billy. And we meet mom, Fancy Nancy Allison McKinley. Now, that's my name for her, Fancy Nancy. She really wasn't all that fancy, but again, a strong, sturdy woman of Pennsylvania, Ohio stock. Her ancestors go back to England, and she lived to be 87 and made it to see her son inaugurated president. So again, a long life. And this was a woman who wasn't exactly featured in the press during the McKinley presidency, but because she was visible and was quotable, occasionally quotes came up from Nancy. And one of them I liked was when a reporter came up to her and said, before the 1896 election, you know, your son could lose this election. And she said, well, either way, he's still my son. So there you go, Nancy Allison McKinley.
Kind of reminds me, Chuck, of some of our relatives. I don't know.
Well, I think what I do see in this woman is definitely McKinley got the glare from her. I think that's pretty clear. I mean, Dad had a pretty good one, but she had that kind of intense FaceTime kind of look here. So if I was a reporter, I would tread lightly around this woman for sure. So we continue on to the young William. This is a photograph from his school days. He attended a academy in Ohio. We'll see shortly. He also attended Allegheny College in Pennsylvania and later went to law school. He was a very good student. He was a very diligent student. He was a good debater. And again, very pious, always a church attendee. There's really no record of nonsense or hijinks or any kind of college shenanigans, except one record from Allegheny College, and he was attending there probably at about age 16. There is a record of him engaging in the game of town ball, which is a forerunner of our baseball. So there was a little bit of athleticism there, but none of the frivolities you see from a lot of kids his age. He looked pretty serious there. You can kind of see where he was going. And it was off to the Civil War is where he was going. This was not long before here, but it was the 1850s when he attended this academy in Poland, Ohio. Very rudimentary school. This is probably a much more developed building in this photo than it was when he was there. Limited curriculum, but again, a religious affiliated school, but again, very typical of a lot of the private academies in the Northeast of this time. Well-rounded and basic education provided. And so we see as the 1850s move along, William McKinley, almost right after Fort Sumter, was volunteering his services along with his cousin, William McKinley Osborne. They decided together to join the Union cause in the Civil War. And there are a few remarkable things about the McKinley Civil War experience. One of them is he's the only president who served in the Civil War who started as a private, an enlisted private, and ended up as a brevet major. So he worked his way through the ranks, and this is another notable thing, through the entire Civil War. This is a man who did not serve his time and go home. He continued to re-enlist. He did his duty, and then he would re-up. He got his furloughs. He did have time away from the military occasionally, but most of that time, for 4 years, he was engaged. And I counted no less than 20 battles that he was involved in, the most famous of which, the Battle of Antietam in Maryland. And that's often cited as his most shining moment as a soldier. He had been promoted prior to the battle to, I believe, the assistant quartermaster position. So he was in charge of, again, we've seen with other presidents in this time period, as a quartermaster, he was in charge of pretty much everything: supplies, deliveries, procurement, safety, making sure that things got to where they needed to go in the right time and space. And he was very good at this. And during this Battle of Antietam, he was more of an assistant. So he was the one doing the deliveries of mostly food and coffee to the soldiers on the front line under fire, was given a bravery medal for this service. But McKinley himself, when asked about his Civil War experience, didn't talk much about it, didn't brag much about it. He was helped, of course, by his connections through his Ohio residency, and this particular connection, which led to perhaps his success as a politician later, was his connection with General Rutherford Hayes, future president and future governor of Ohio. They remained friends throughout the rest of Hayes's life. So McKinley had an ally early on in the war, and Hayes was responsible, I believe, for his promotion, at least on one occasion, if not more. And again, so the connection certainly helped, but his abhorrence of war is also clear when asked about the war later in life. He does cite one battle, not Antietam, as the most harrowing experience, and that was the battle at Cloyd's Mountain, Virginia, in May of 1864. And he's vague about why this was the worst of the battles for him, but it seems to be this was getting near a very desperate time for the Confederates. And he said in so many words that what he saw there was a new level of depravity that hadn't been seen to that time in the war. So again, he was extremely impacted by his Civil War experience, was proud yet not a braggart about it. And from this point after the Civil War on, he was generally referred to as Major McKinley, or the Major, as he left the Civil War with that commission, brevet major. He leaves the military and goes right into law studies. We see him here, a line drawing of him right around 1866. He ends up in Albany, New York, at Albany Law School, and he studies privately as well, passes the bar in 1867. And instructive in his law career, which isn't a very notable law career in some respects, he soon gets more involved in politics as opposed to his law career. But one of his earliest cases, in fact, I believe it's his first real case, is a case that gets dropped on him suddenly by his senior partner, who has to leave town suddenly. And it's a case involving a malpractice suit. A local doctor was being sued by a patient who believed his broken leg, had been set incorrectly, thus creating a permanent crook in the leg. So this was held in a court trial, and the opposing lawyer to McKinley was Ohio's leading attorney in these type of cases, a very successful attorney. So upon viewing this victim, this alleged victim of malpractice in the courtroom, McKinley notices he has kind of a funny walk, and it doesn't seem to be necessarily related to the mangled leg. So after showing the court the mangled leg by request, McKinley watches the man leave the stand and then sees this funny walk and says, "Excuse me, I would like to have this man show his other leg to the court." And then there's a big kerfuffle, and the other lawyer says this is not necessary. And then it turns out McKinley persists. The man raises his other leg, which is more crooked than the supposedly damaged leg that the doctor supposedly set incorrectly. So this is showing that this man was born with crooked legs. And McKinley says, "Wow, you should hire this doctor to fix your other leg, because compared to that one, the one that you claim has been malpractice looks pretty good." So case closed, McKinley wins. And this is an example of his keen power of observation. His quietness is often mistaken for shyness or aloofness or other such things. But in his world, it was his way to fully observe people and events and occurrences around him. And I think this is a fine example of his really, really strong ability to kind of see what was really happening. He was a very calm and patient man, and this served him well both as a lawyer and as a politician. So he's practicing in Canton, Ohio at this time, and he meets a young gal, a local belle, and her name is Ida Saxton. She's the daughter of very wealthy Canton business family. They meet at a picnic, and they have a 2-year courting ending in marriage in 1871. He was 27, she was 23. They had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, one daughter died in infancy, and the other daughter died at about age 4, Catherine. And upon the death of the older of the 2, Catherine, the firstborn, Ida had a nervous breakdown, and which of course they didn't call it then. And she basically spent the rest of her life in somewhat mourning, but also was described from this point forward as an epileptic, which she would have seizures quite often in public. And McKinley, very, very nonplussed, would simply cover her face with a handkerchief in a public setting and walk her kindly out of the room, set her down, stay with her a while, make sure she was taken care of, and return, often by himself. And this was a scene that was seen so many times by the McKinley's friends and cohorts that, you know, it was kind of taken for granted. But it was William's way of including his wife without her illness being a concern. So again, they were a very close couple, and they have very when looking back at this time frame, you see little nuances between them that indicate their love of each other. What you don't see, though, as a historian, is piles of love letters. Photographs are fairly scarce, so there aren't really a lot of insights into their personal life. You know, a lot of it's based on secondhand reports, friends, relatives commenting on what they're seeing, but it's not necessarily from William and Ida themselves. So we're doing some guesswork here when it comes to their romance and marriage and such. But anyway, no question, a very close couple. And it's around this time that William enters politics, and this is at Ida's urging. She's fully supportive of his political career. He runs first for Stark County prosecuting attorney, which he wins, and then begins a career as a public figure. This is in the early 1870s. By 1876, he's seen as a viable political candidate. He is a staunch Republican at this time, as he's always been. His first vote was for Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. And so he becomes a successful candidate for Congress in 1876 from his district in Ohio. Now, there is another law incident right around this time that's significant, another law case. He takes on, in I think it was 1875, early 1876, he takes on a case involving strikebreakers who were accused of rioting during railroad strikes in Ohio, which happened to be pretty rampant during the 1870s and 80s, and even into the 1890s, as we'll see when McKinley's governor. He takes on the case defending the rioters in this case against the railroad, and he gets acquittals for all but one of the rioters, which was remarkable to the man sitting across the table from McKinley at this case, at this trial, and it was Mark Hanna, who we'll meet soon. He was one of the owners of the railroad that was involved in this case, and although he watched the opposing lawyer defeat him in his cause, he was very impressed with McKinley's ability and his straightforwardness, and that began a friendship that lasted until McKinley's death, and certainly was a big factor in McKinley's success as a politician, starting not here in 1876. I believe Hanna's real financial contribution doesn't really come into play until the governor position is available in the 1890s. But as congressman, it's well worth noting that Major McKinley was a strong supporter of African-American voting rights and voting rights in general. He gave several speeches about free and fair elections at this time. He also was a target of gerrymandering on several occasions. So if you think gerrymandering is something new in the news these days, it's not. It's gone through cycles of craziness and ridiculousness. This was, at this point in Ohio history, this seems to be more run-of-the-mill gerrymandering, meaning whoever took over, the Democrats, Republicans, would just redraw things to their advantage. But much to McKinley's credit, he blew out the gerrymander on 3 occasions. So in other words, Democrats take over the state, redistrict everything. McKinley still won 3 of those 4 times when he was attempted to be gerrymandered out. Now, the last time in 1890, his last run for Congress was during a year where he had sponsored a bill called the McKinley Tariff Act. And this was a protective tariff bill designed to help the American manufacturer, the American consumer, putting high taxes on, or import fees, I guess they'd be called, on foreign goods. And this was his obsession. As a congressman, he became known as the tariff guy. He believed you couldn't be a master of everything, so find something you're good at and go with it and be an expert. And he was indeed an expert on the numbers when it came to the tariff. Could talk about it forwards and backwards. However, at the same time in 1890, as this McKinley bill becomes law, he gets gerrymandered again in his district. And this time he loses because there are some economic issues in Ohio, perhaps, that cost him his seat. But right away, he doesn't really lose because he becomes the leading candidate for the governor position in the next year's election of 1891, which now has the support of the next guy we'll meet, Marcus A. Hanna, Ohio capitalist based out of Cleveland. This man owned most of Cleveland by many accounts. He owned the Cleveland Plain Dealer newspaper. He owned the Cleveland Opera House. He owned pretty much the entire transportation system. So a mover and a shaker, but not as rapacious as many people bring him out to be. His critics, which you still see to this day, depictions of this man as a kingmaker, as a handler of politicians. He wasn't quite what the history has led us to believe. He did have, again, not an anti-labor stance. The laborers, in his view, were his customers. So he did not want to appear to be someone who was trashing labor. He believed in arbitration between his workers and the managers of his companies. He believed in sharing as much wealth as possible while also retaining his wealth. So he finds a perfect cohort in McKinley, because you have the behind-the-scenes operator with all the money and the shrewd business skill to sell a campaign. And we see this coming into play for the first time in our country. We see much more political advertising. We see, of course, widespread media access. Pamphleteering was huge during this period. People learning about public events and issues through one side or another side's pamphleteering efforts. And Hanna was absolutely, again, in favor of the working man, while also in favor of promoting business across the board, whether it was Ohio or nationally. So again, this is a very, very strong connection, the Hanna-McKinley alliance. And it begins again in the early 1890s in Ohio as McKinley wins the governorship. He serves 2 terms as governor of Ohio. And what's interesting about these terms, the Ohio governor position is mostly ceremonial at this time. I'm not sure if it's changed, but he can't really initiate legislation. So he becomes kind of a figurehead or a spokesperson, and really doesn't have a lot to do. It's really kind of a ceremonial job. So one of his traditions as governor of Ohio, and this is based out of Columbus, the capital. He would go to his office window at 3 p.m., no matter what he was doing, and he would wave his white handkerchief out at the window so his wife, who was across the way, several blocks away, but could see that window, his wife would be able to see the handkerchief and she would wave back something she was doing or crocheting or something. So it was their 3 o'clock little message to each other. So that's what the governorship provided for McKinley. Not a whole lot of clout, but what he did do is, again, he positioned himself at this time to be as pro-labor as he could. As governor, there were several strikes that got violent. He did call out the National Guard on more than one occasion, but he also tried to institute arbitration. He tried to institute nonviolent forms of settlement. He also raised money for striking families to help feed them. So again, this is a kind of an interesting middle ground he's treading, friends with the business capitalist, and also understanding his votes and his concerns are with these people, the citizens of Ohio, who are amongst the not so fortunate. So we see how this plays into his political future. During this time also, he is a frequent visitor to the Republican National Convention, the 4-year event picking the presidential candidate. He is there in 1884, he's there in 1888, and he's also there in 1892. And each of those 3 times, he has to stop rallies that are trying to put his name in the hat for presidency. And it wasn't until the 1892 attempt to put him into the presidency or the candidate role. It wasn't until then that Hanna realized that there might be something more than the governorship awaiting for McKinley. So we move forward. We see that they're positioning in 1896. McKinley is becoming a clear favorite, and a lot of it has to do with the administration prior to his, the Grover Cleveland second administration, which has endured a very severe depression in 1893. So the Republican chances are excellent in 1896. The economy is rebounding by this time. And McKinley is so clearly a front runner that there's very few people even willing to throw their hat in the ring to go against him at this time. And meanwhile, it's Mr. Hanna doing the legwork, going to the Northeast, going to the different sections of the country, including the South, trying to arrange for this easy pick of McKinley as the Republican choice in 1896. That does come to fruition at the convention in the summer. And here's the man they chose to run on the ticket with McKinley. And this was not a predicted choice by any means. Garrett A. Hobart was a New Jersey lawyer born in Paterson, practiced in Paterson, was also a businessman and a community leader. Was married to Jenny Tuttle Hobart, who also we see will soon play a role in the McKinley administration. This man is I would say is the probably the best vice president in our nation's history, and I'm not simply biased because one of his previous jobs prior to becoming vice president for McKinley was to run the Passaic County Water Commission, which of course provided water to my family and all my neighbors growing up. So to me, there was a personal connection to see this man next to McKinley, one step away from the White House. And unfortunately, his death in 1899 denied everyone the chance to see how Garrett Hobart would have been as president. Of course, we ended up with Teddy Roosevelt. So it's not all bad, but Garrett was, the reason I say he was the best vice president, I believe, is he was connected to McKinley strongly in the administration. He was not sitting in cabinet meetings, which was customary, but he was also considered a close advisor, met with McKinley frequently, and the two couples socialized frequently. And Ida wasn't really too social of an animal, but she got along wonderfully with Jenny Hobart, and Garrett and William got along. And this was a real happy foursome, first and second families. You don't really see this maybe till Clinton Gore. Like, I'm not really sure where you have an example of a president and vice president getting along so well. And this guy was an administrator, so he had great skills in not so much vote getting, but in keeping an eye on things and in keeping track of everything. He was the eyes and ears in the Senate that McKinley couldn't be. So again, he did a wonderful job. And you see on the lower left of this photograph, the Garrett Mountain Reservation. This is a mountain named after our vice president here, Garrett Hobart. And I remember vividly in 10th grade, Clifton High School, our teacher, Mr. Bernie Klein, trying to challenge the class of who we thought, a bunch of kids don't care about history. So I'm going to give extra credit to the person who could stand up and tell me who that mountain was named after. And he points to Garrett Mountain, and I stood right up and I said, Garrett Hobart. So again, long been a fan of his, and I'm sorry he didn't make it to become the 26th president. But anyway, we move forward with the victorious ticket, and here's who they were victorious over. A little known at the time 36-year-old representative from Nebraska named William Jennings Bryan. Of course, his fame grew from this time on. In 1896, he secured the Democratic nomination with a speech that is still considered the most moving and stirring speech in convention history. And he concluded his speech by claiming, "You will not crucify mankind on a cross of gold." And he stood there with his hands apart like he was being crucified. And it was a very dramatic speech. He was simply advocating for free coinage of silver. That was the main issue in 1896, is do you expand the money supply by allowing free coinage of silver, or do you just stick with the gold standard? Everything has to be backed by gold. That's the best policy for sound currency. That was generally the McKinley policy, although he wasn't exclusively a gold person. He did earlier as a representative vote for bimetallism, which was including silver at some ratio into the currency system. He became more of a gold advocate later as gold was discovered more during this period. The late 1890s, you had gold rushes in Alaska and Australia, which brought more gold into the gold reserve, which kind of made the silver argument a bit weaker. But again, Bryan was attracting ruralites. He was attracting farmers. He tried to attract urban labor workers, but did not gain much traction there, and ended up losing the election. I wouldn't call it a landslide. I think the popular vote was fairly close, but the electoral vote was not close because Jennings Bryan did not carry any states in the Northeast where he needed at least one or two. And again, Bryan traveled the country. I think more than anyone up until that time, gave something like 400 speeches during his attempt to become president, whereas McKinley knew he couldn't do that. And his campaign in 1896 was just, I'm just going to stay home. I'm going to do my front porch campaign. I'll have people coming through and I'll give them speeches. It was all very planned. It was all programmed. There was nothing impromptu. They made it try to look impromptu, but McKinley had everything arranged, from his responses to, the applause. And when told at one point, you really have to go out there and match Jennings Bryan for all of his energetic speeches. And his quote was probably the funniest thing William McKinley ever said, at least that's been recorded. He said, when asked to go out and campaign Bryan style, he said, "I might just as well set up a trapeze on my front lawn and compete with some professional athlete as go out speaking against Bryan. I have to think when I speak," end quote. So this is McKinley at his most humorous. And it is really kind of funny to think of William McKinley on a trapeze, generally speaking. He wasn't really built for trapezing. So that is a funny line. But again, it doesn't mean that the style wasn't effective. The front porch campaign was very effective. And you had McKinley, again, lining up these people from Canton, from other parts of Ohio. Basically, they got free bus rides to his house. he had the professional handshake figured out by this time. But during his congressional career, he spent a lot of time perfecting the best handshake to keep the line moving, to keep his hand from getting sore, to meet the most people. So again, a different type of style than the Bryan oration style, but again, a very calculating politician. And people often left McKinley saying, I didn't get anything I wanted, but I feel good. Like, you leave feeling good. He was a feel good kind of guy. So never negative, never, there's no record of him raising his voice. There's no record of McKinley getting mad even in public, which is remarkable. And again, Bryan tried again in 1900. We'll see a little of that coming up. But let's move forward here, and we'll get to some of the 1896 attempts at buying an election. This was Mark Hanna putting in lots of his own money and raising $6 million from Republican, mostly business sources, to basically print anything and publish anything they could promoting McKinley. So here you see a smoking factory, and the question is asked, do you smoke? And there you go. Since 1896, you have a working factory. That means McKinley came in and got the factories going again. Of course, an exaggerated storyline, but again, we see more propaganda, more bling, more ribbons and baubles than we've ever seen before. And mostly it's the working of Mark Hanna. In fact, Ted Roosevelt, at the time in 1896, not yet part of the McKinley administration, made the comment like something along the lines of, Hanna is selling McKinley like a patent medicine. And it was true. This is one of the first times we've seen such a concerted attempt to sell a candidate as you would a product. We go to the next bit of bling, and this is a sheet music cover from the 1896 election, the song, The Republican Two-Step March. I'm sure it was a lively, lively tune. You can tell McKinley looks like he's ready to dance in this photo. And again, it was just part of what was entertainment back in 1896. You can put this in context of, say, this is what people did when they didn't have Netflix. They went out and sang songs. And when you see some of the lyrics of the songs, it's unbelievable. They're singing songs about protective tariffs. I mean, can you imagine that today? A campaign song about like the Federal Reserve System? It's hard to fathom, but we have other things to do now than to make up songs about the Federal Reserve, which is, I'm assuming, why you don't see that. We have other forms of entertainment, but entertainment stretched deeply into politics at this time. And we see many examples. This is just a small example of the combining of entertainment, politics, and information. So we go forward now with the first cartoon of the McKinley administration. This is a positive cartoon. A lot of the cartoons we see in the McKinley years are negative cartoons, made him to be seen as a tool of Hanna. We'll see a few of those later. But this is a cartoon that's commending McKinley for the Dingley tariff of 1897, named after Nelson Dingley, a congressman. This tariff was following along McKinley's father's footsteps of being a pro-American manufacturing tariff. This was a tariff that put high import fees on foreign goods, again, to bolster American markets, to bolster consumer wages. He had all of these formulas down as a congressman that he brought to the presidency. And he called for a special session to pass this act right away, as soon as he got in March of 1897. So this was really soon, and it had a lot of support. And you see John Bull on the left of this cartoon representing England, like, hey, what are you doing? And McKinley can't hear because he's busy taking care of his own people on this side of the ocean. So again, a positive political cartoon. We go forward with the person who we're going the other way now. Let's go there we go. This next person we'll see. We all know Mr. Roosevelt. Again, we heard his critiques of McKinley and Hanna prior to this. Hanna, by the way, couldn't stand this guy. Hanna thought Teddy Roosevelt was a loose cannon, and which is not far off base. And McKinley also didn't know about Roosevelt so much, but was concerned about his tendency to pick fights. That's a literal quote from McKinley. Like, I'd like to have a spot for him in my administration, but he's such an agitator. I don't really like that. So he was very hesitant at first to put Teddy into his administration, but Teddy was a hot commodity. Teddy was formerly New York mayor and police commissioner, and was a publicity magnet. He just drew attention to him with his bombastic statements and his corruption fighting tendencies. So they found a job for him in the McKinley administration. They kind of thought they were going to bury him in there a little bit as the assistant secretary of the Navy. And the credentials are simply, he wrote a book about naval history prior to that. So that was thought to be enough to give him the credentials. Well, Teddy could have been an expert on anything he chose to be an expert on. And certainly he took his role as Assistant Secretary of Navy very, very seriously, far more seriously than the actual Secretary of Navy, John Long, did. John Long was a friend of McKinley's from Congress, who, it was just a ceremonial cabinet job for him. He didn't really think much of it. But Teddy could see where things were going with Cuba. There were tensions coming up in Latin America. And this is a classic Teddy story. It was not long into his position. I guess he was in his, would have been his second year, early in his second, actually right about at the end of his first year in office. He starts in April 1897. So this incident happens in February of 1898. We have the main explosion, which we'll hear about shortly. So what Teddy does is, this is on a day off from his boss. His boss liked to take a lot of days off. And Teddy loved those days because he'd go in and do all these things not allowed, really, if the boss was there. And on one day, the boss took off. Teddy sent Commodore George Dewey and his fleet to Hong Kong from a different location in the Pacific. And this was positioning Dewey to be near Manila in case hostilities broke out with Spain, which is exactly what happened. Long comes back to work the next day. It's like, what'd you do, Ted? You sent Dewey to Hong Kong? You can't do that. But it was too late to renege, and they let it stand. Long went along with it, and that's kind of what led to the Manila story we're gonna learn about shortly. So we see also they tried burying Teddy as the vice president 4 years later, and that didn't work either. So we see, this is what we just talked about, the main explosion of February 15th, 1898 in Havana Harbor. This explosion killed 266 Navy members who were there on it's hard to call it a peacekeeping mission. They were there kind of as a monitor to increasing unrest in Havana. They weren't sent for any specific reason. It's just that the consul in Havana was concerned about Cuban insurgents. You had a rising revolutionary movement in Cuba, and the Maine was there kind of as a precautionary thing. When it exploded, immediately it was thought to be a Spanish mine. That was the cause of it. A board of inquiry determined that also a month and a half later, while at the same time, a Spanish board of inquiry determined that it was an internal explosion. So that was their official finding. Our official finding was the opposite, that it was an external explosion. So that was the impetus that led us down the road to the Spanish-American War. You had people that wanted to go to war with Spain right away, right after this incident, including Teddy Roosevelt. And then you had the calmer McKinley, who was not interested in starting a war at all, looking at it like, well, let's make sure we get all the facts right. Let's make sure we're doing the right thing. But meanwhile, the war whooping is increasing and intensifying. And at the same time, a letter is released to the public, an insider letter from the Spain minister mocking McKinley, calling him spineless, and again, a personal affront to McKinley. So the nation's honor, our nation's honor, is being impacted at this point, and many people are crying for war. And McKinley withholds a little longer until he can hold back no longer. But as the history wheel turned, we see down the road, I think it's not till the 1950s or 1960s, the Spanish Board of Inquiry was made correct by the official the official investigation, which proved that the Maine did indeed explode from an internal boiler explosion. So it had nothing to do with the Spanish mine. And so you see a false cause of a war, basically, right here. The explosion did happen, the deaths were real, but the cause was not what it was said to be. So we move forward. We have a nation preparing for war. We have an official declaration of war signed by President McKinley on April 20th. This is presented to him by Congress. So we have a legal war, which is interesting. Unlike, say, Korea or other events that were called military or police actions, this is an actual sanctioned, constitutionally verified war. And one of the first actions we see, good old Ted had George Dewey positioned perfectly in Hong Kong. So right away, April 20th, he sends cables, go to Manila and destroy the Spanish fleet, which is exactly what George Dewey did on May 1st, May Day, 1898. That's Dewey at the top of the helm there. We see a picture of him also coming up. He was a Commodore at this point. And the position of admiral is created for him when he returns to the States as a huge celebrity later in 1898. If we can see the painting of him, by the way, the annihilation of the Spanish fleet at Manila Harbor was complete. There wasn't a single boat left of the Spanish fleet. So this was a huge victory in the United States, widely celebrated, and pretty much was the beginning of the end for the Spanish effort here. We do see, again, the next painting is a painting of George Dewey. There's some fun facts about him, but he becomes kind of one of the early modern day celebrities, Mr. Dewey. Now, with his new title of admiral, he becomes kind of like we just saw with McKinley's campaign. He becomes the object of sales. He becomes a poster child for selling neckties, for selling decorative lamps. He's posted on everything, including chewing gum called Dewey's Chewies. So again, it's the American marketeering spirit coming to full fruition here in the 1898 days, and this is still in the middle of the war, which didn't last very long. But again, this man becomes a national hero, and based on one battle, the Battle of Manila Harbor. So we now have a very, very strong position by wiping out the Spanish fleet, and our focus now becomes more on Cuba. Again, we are trying to straddle a line between the concept of freeing Cuba from its Spanish oppressors and allowing Cuban independence. This is a real challenge because while we as a free country, we champion freedoms around the world, and we often find offense at oppressive colonialism. In this case, we had to be careful of what we were wishing for, because certainly few were calling for Cuba to be added as one of our states, if anyone, and few really wanted Cuban independence being so close to our shores near Florida. So again, the war is still in full force here, but the question is starting to come up is what happens after the war ends, because it's becoming clear we are going to emerge the victors. And this is the key victory in the Cuban operations. This is the battle at El Caney near Santiago, Cuba. And this is just a wonderful, kind of graphic, but wonderful painting, both the color and just showing precisely what was happening. This is an accurate, almost like a photographic type accurate depiction of Santiago Harbor. The blockade you can see in the distance, that's an American blockade of ships off in the distance there. So a truly wonderful depiction. And again, this is a war that we were dominating. Our real threat was from illness and tropical disease, not the Spanish. We had very few battle casualties. Most of our casualties were due to illness, and we did not have one soldier captured in this war, and we lost no ground. So it was pretty one-sided. this becomes a deciding battle in Cuba. This is in June of 1898. By July, the fighting was pretty much over, and Spain was clamoring for a peace settlement of sorts. So we do see the next vision is of the post. This is the post-war result. So you have two treaties here. We'll see a depiction of one of them. There's a ceasefire treaty, which is called the Hay-Cambon Agreement. Cambon being a French ambassador authorized to speak for the Spaniards. But this simply agrees on ending hostilities. The settlements, as far as the territories, comes in the Treaty of Paris negotiations, which isn't settled until December later of that year. So this cartoon is more relating to that treaty. And basically, it's Uncle Sam the dentist taking out Spanish possessions, which are the teeth of the patient in this gruesome cartoon. And it seemed like everyone understood at least, what was going on in Cuba. Puerto Rico also was pretty clear cut. It got a little bit fuzzier when it came to territories, Spanish territories such as Guam and certainly the Philippines, because I don't think a lot of thought was put into the possessions post-war, what becomes of them. Certainly, they can't be reverted to Spain, and often the thought was never let them go back to their own devices because they're not capable. That was the prevailing attitude, was these island countries such as Hawaii, which McKinley annexed in 1897. That was one of his first acts as president. They were islanders who weren't really considered as part of the American fabric. So many people resisted the idea of these islands becoming part of our country. A lot of anti-imperialism at this time, which is what it was referred to as, was kind of overt racism. Like, we can't include these foreign lands and islands because there's not white people there unless they're from our country being sent there, like in Hawaii. So again, a touchy subject, increasingly so for the McKinley administration, became what becomes of the colonies that we inherit. There's a great quote at this time from a friend of McKinley's who says, quote, "The president seems more impressed with his responsibilities than his triumphs," meaning he wasn't gloating at this time. He was truly not sure what comes next in the line of action regarding the Spanish possessions. So we go forward now, and we see the treaty. This is the first signing of the agreement between Hay and Cambon, and this is at Washington, D.C. This is August 12th, 1898, and then later in Paris, the peace treaty, which designates the relinquishment by Spain to the United States of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. So that's about a 5-month gap there between these two signings. But this ends hostility. So literally, it starts in April. It's over by August, the Spanish-American War. And it's called by the Secretary of State, John Hay, a splendid little war. That's the title it's been given often since that time. Really nothing splendid or little about it, actually, though. One of the not splendid things was, as a result of this settlement, the Treaty of Paris, the United States paid Spain $20 million in indemnities as part of this transaction. And to me, I'm confused by that. I really didn't know that a winning side had to pay the losing side money. And 20 million in 1898 is the equivalent of like 160 million today. So again, not a small sum, but it's hard to see that as a victory when you're paying the losing side. Also, the little part is squashed by the Philippines, because there's nothing little regarding the Spanish-American War with connection to the Philippines. The Philippines ends up being a very long and very complex problem for this country well into the 19th or the 20th century. So again, this is kind of the beginning of the next phase of the American empire. This is our country showing its first kind of international clout, and then deciding what to do with that clout. It's a transitional period for the American public and the country. And again, to McKinley's credit, what he's responsible for up to this point as the commander-in-chief is relaying information. He decides that the White House is going to become a clearinghouse for war information. He sets up the first war room in the White House with modern equipment, cables, telephones, everything possible, maps. And this is the forerunner of what we see later presidents do as far as relaying information. Was it completely honest and fully revealing information? No, of course it wasn't. It was managed heavily, but it's a new phase for the country. And again, I think McKinley saw the future very well. He saw where technology was taking us. He saw the shrinking of the world. We'll see that in his last speech also. He touches on a lot of these subjects. So he's not, unlike Benjamin Harrison, who was afraid to touch the electrical lights in the White House, this guy is embracing technology to try to get his message across. And I think he did a wonderful job through he had a press secretary named George Cortelyou, who ends up sticking around for the Roosevelt years, a truly brilliant man who was able to help McKinley on so many levels convey the messages to the American public. And again, what we see as a result of the Spanish-American War, we see a melting away of the North-South division from the Civil War. And it's not complete melting, obviously, because there's still some chunks left today. But the melting, in a sense of you had two different sides from one war now fighting together. You had generals from the Civil War still active, now a general for both former Confederate and former Union soldiers. You had basically it's the unity that comes with a foreign enemy. Foreign enemies often unite dividing forces because you have to band together to achieve victory. And victory was really never even a consideration. It was pretty much a given that if we didn't botch it, we would win. And there were some botchings. The War Department wasn't ready for the war. Russell Alger was the appointment by McKinley to this cabinet post, and he was terrible. He was not up to the job. And luckily, in the post-war period, Elihu Root took over, a much more capable administrator, and got the War Department back on solid footing. But there were corruption charges during the Spanish-American War. There were profiteering charges, and Alger kind of has a hand in all of this with his lackadaisical leadership. So McKinley didn't make all great choices by any means. Secretary of State, too, I mentioned John Hay. He was a replacement for his first choice, John Sherman, an old Ohio senator friend who was in failing health by the time he got to the Secretary of State position and was not able to do his duty for very long. So we do see the cabinet revamp for the better for McKinley's purposes. And we also see, again, a new voice for America on the world stage. And we're going to continue with the Philippine part of the war. Now, this despite the misspelling there of Philippines, we are aware of that. This is a real tragic and unknown part of the Spanish-American War. These are American soldiers in trenches in the Philippines, and basically it's not a very complicated story. It's a complicated war at this point, but the story goes when we sent over our government and our military to take over possession of the Philippines, and this was late 1898, early 1899. In fact, William Howard Taft was sent by McKinley to be the governor of the Philippines at this point. And there's really no problems with the Taft administration in the Philippines. It's more of a problem with the insurgent locals who are rebelling against the next foreign takeover. They were rebelling against Spain periodically over the last centuries, and now they have a new overlord to rule against. And it's a guerrilla movement led by a man named Aguinaldo, who initiates, and continues to its conclusion a 3-year guerrilla warfare siege with American troops in the Philippines. And this is an ugly, ugly story. 120,000 American troops were sent. 1,000 died in battle. Many more were sick and died of tropical illness. And this went on for 3 years, mostly not with full awareness by the American people. This was not widely covered like the Spanish-American War was. There were no Teddy Roosevelts going up San Juan Hill. This was just ugliness. And this was very, very, very eerily similar to Vietnam in its futility of the fighting. I mean, to think about the removal of entrenched guerrillas in an archipelago of like 2,000 islands or something like that. I mean, an impossible task, made worse by bad military decisions, including an affair very similar to the My Lai massacre. There was a court-martial of a very high-ranking official, a military official. So ugliness in the Philippines, and this is what the anti-imperial folks were talking about. We're biting off more than we can chew here, folks. Do we really have a necessary interest in taking over the Philippines? Many argue we just need a coaling station. We just need a naval base. We don't need the islands. We don't know what to do with them anyway. They're not going to be a state. They're not going to fly the flag. They're just going to be just what they are now, only under our leadership. It really didn't make sense to a lot of people, both financially and morally. It didn't make sense. And under racial thoughts too. Again, part of it is racism. We don't want brown people in our country is the theme of a lot of these anti-imperialists. So we move on to the 1900 campaign. McKinley is in a very strong position to get reelected, and he decides to just run on his record. He's not going to do any campaign speaking, no front porch. He gives one speech, I believe, during the whole 1900 campaign. And his opponent, once again, is William Jennings Bryan, with a different focus now. Bryan is off the silver, and he's on to the anti-imperialism. That's his main focus. So we have the full dinner bucket. This is the new campaign slogan of the McKinley and crew. The previous slogan was, let's see, there was a certain slogan that Hannah had for him on the first go-round. It was the advance agent of prosperity. And now McKinley's going to bring you the full dinner bucket. And that was repeated over and over again. Full dinner bucket, good for labor, good for the manufacturers, just good for American progress, basically. And it was hard to argue at this point. Bryan tried and finished further behind than he did in 1896. So we'll see some more bling. I think coming up, we have another. This is actually from the Bryan camp. This was an attempt again to refocus the Bryan candidacy on anti-imperialism. Like, where does our flag belong? What are our responsibilities for these people in countries we've taken over? And he was asking very serious, very important moral questions that largely got ignored because the country was reveling in the victory. They didn't want to hear a whining guy from Nebraska talk about what was wrong with the country. And Bryan was a very positive man. He liked to pit things good versus evil. He liked to pit things in a moral tone and a religious tone, but he also was very honest and upstanding. He just was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And again, finished further behind McKinley than he did in 1896. And another interesting thing about McKinley and Bryan and the Democrats is that although he was clearly the candidate's choice in the conventions in 1896 and 1900, there weren't a lot of debate over his candidacy. It was the fact that Democratic newspapers refused to support him. Only one, the New York Journal, owned by William Randolph Hearst, was consistently mocking and ripping McKinley and promoting Bryan. Other ones would mock McKinley and not promote Bryan, and other ones avoided the subject altogether. And these are Democratic newspapers. So this is showing you a split in the Democratic Party between the Cleveland Democrats, much more conservative, gold standard people, and now you have the silver and you have the anti-imperialist. You have a different type of Democrat. Maybe perhaps you'd look at it as a more liberal Democrat, like economically, at least in today's terms. and Bryant. So you see a split in the Democratic Party, which gives the Republicans more power. And we go forward with, this is one of the examples of the New York Journal style of cartooning. You see, that's Papa Trust, the big guy with the gut, dictating to Boy Willie. That's Mr. McKinley, the president. And in the background, the very, very ugly and sinister Nursey Hannah. And that's supposed to be Mark Hanna, kind of controlling the trust, who's lecturing to McKinley. So a very, very clear message trying to be sent here that McKinley is a tool. McKinley does whatever the businesses want. And it's just not true. It's just not the case. McKinley is not as spineless as made out to be. So Teddy Roosevelt was wrong when he claimed that McKinley had the backbone of a chocolate eclair. That was incorrect. McKinley simply was friends with Hanna, who saw the win-win of helping the American worker while helping the business owner as well. And these were days of disparity, not unlike today, but with a much different looking middle class, a growing but much smaller middle class. So again, McKinley was trying to speak to a whole nation in ways that you just really don't see. He's taking a middle road that the more you kind of study it, you realize that it's an odd middle road, because most middle roaders get attacked from both sides. And here you have a middle roader who's hardly attacked at all. It's a very small segment of the population focusing on this kind of cartoon, but really not very effectively. His middle of the road is seeming to work at this point in time. So again, maybe it's because it's from an era gone by, but we do see this quiet, patient man being a very effective politician by being more inclusive. He's not alienating people on the far sides, with the possible exception of Native Americans and African Americans, which we'll touch on briefly. But here you see another cartoon of William Jennings Bryan being sent back with his full dinner pail to Nebraska. So the irony here is obvious. And again, we had a mostly satisfied country in 1900, which is why we had, more or less a landslide. But we do see, some interesting developments in the spectrum as well. We see no longer a populist party. They've melded with the Democrats. So this is the division of Democrats. You have the populists now pulling them to the left. And you see a consolidation of power with the Republicans. Here we have the second inaugural address. This is March 4th, 1901. This is recorded. There are speeches of McKinley's that are recorded, and they are available to the public. I encourage you to go online to listen to them, to hear him speak. It's a very interesting vocal tone. It's kind of like New England-y and formal, but it has kind of a Midwestern flatness to it too. Fairly easily understood, even though it's crackly and the audio recordings aren't very good. But it's just interesting to hear these very first audio recordings that have been preserved, and also some of the film also is the earliest recorded footage of presidential activities, and it's just fascinating to see some of these rare images. So second inaugural address, it's pretty nondescript at this point. There's not a lot of controversy going on. We did have one incident I'd like to bring up from 1900 that we don't have photos of at this time, but the Boxer Rebellion must be discussed briefly. This is a 1900 event in China that involves no less than 8 foreign countries, due to the fact that we have a lot of business activity starting in China in the late 1800s from representatives from around the world. And we also have a lot of missionary activity in China starting in the 1860s. So when local Chinese young folks, these were mostly men, these were mostly secret society members, they were involved in martial arts societies, they started to rise up and rebel against the foreigners. And this is what became known as the Boxer Rebellion. At first, official Chinese government opposed these people and then supported them, which created more chaos and created more danger for the 5,000 or so foreigners who were trapped in Beijing at this time. The siege began on Beijing. These people were trapped basically in an embassy area, surrounded by rebels, the Boxers. They were called Boxers, by the way. It had nothing to do with loose-fitting underwear. It was because they looked like boxers to Americans, to the American missionaries. They had strong arms, and they were all doing the martial arts kind of secretly. So they appeared to be boxers to the Americans. Also included in the trapped 5,000 there for, I think it was a 3-month period before the Marines were sent in to Beijing. Herbert Hoover was there with his wife Lou. He was a young engineer working for a company doing mining testing in China, and was stuck there in the middle of a lot of chaos for a while until the Marines were sent in. And there's amazing images of Marines scaling walls in Beijing to not only protect and relieve the kidnapped, or the hostages is basically what they were. They were hostages. Also, it's an attempt to help the Chinese government from internal chaos. That's the official purpose of our being there. And McKinley sent 3,200 troops to join an international brigade, which I didn't know existed in 1898 or in 1899, to put down this rebellion. And it was effective, and it opened up further commerce in China. And again, something worth looking into. The Chinese intricacies of their own politics is a little beyond me, but our involvement was amazing. And it did create some tension because technically this was not allowed by the Constitution. The president did not technically have any power to send people or military personnel to another country to protect missionaries and business interests. But this had already been going on in Hawaii. We sent Marines there unofficially. So it's not, McKinley wasn't breaking new ground here by sending troops to China. But again, it's something we don't think about. Chinese troops on the streets of, U.S. troops on the streets of Beijing, scaling walls, trying to save hostages. Okay, so in between all the excitement, the McKinleys were able to get out and relax a little bit. This is a photo. I believe this is from the Hanna residence in Washington, D.C. So I believe this was a dinner party thrown by Mark Hanna and his family with guests. And this is a typical night out. Not that they did this frequently. This was fairly infrequent, but Ida, despite her illnesses, was always there. She may not have stayed the whole night, but she was always going to go whenever possible to join her husband at these affairs. She loved it. She loved the pomp and the banter. She was just very comfortable in this environment. And he was comfortable too. He was a schmoozer. He was, again, doesn't look to be a schmoozer in that picture, but he really was. He was a very good people person. Here he is, the day before his assassination, giving a speech called the Timekeeper of Progress speech. And it's worth looking up and reading. It's an interesting speech, and again, it's in his own words, which presidents did back then. They had to be smart enough to write their own words. How about that? McKinley certainly was comfortable as a speaker and very comfortable writing, and he wasn't that stuffy of a writer in some ways. I mean, it kind of comes off that way when you read about these people from this era. Sometimes it's hard to get through. But he uses interesting phrases in this speech. One of the phrases he uses is omnipotence never sleeps. And he's referring to our country. He's referring to our newly found omnipotence. And there's no time for sleeping when you have this new role. He talked a lot in the speech about the small world, meaning that cables and telephones and telegraphs, all of these things have shrunk the world to the point where information can be transmitted almost instantaneously. So during the war, he was able to utilize this real-time information, and he compared it to the War of 1812, when Jackson was notified 3 weeks after the Battle of New Orleans that the war had ended before that. So again, he was trying to give examples of where we are in technology's kind of framework and where we are going. And he used this exposition as an example of, these are where inventions are tested. These are where people get new ideas for their own and take them home and work on them and tinker. This is it's a symposium of idea. And the best of America comes out of these type of events where it's not competitive, but he certainly was aware and okay with competition. He thought competition was healthy to a degree, but he also saw this as a kind of a free ground for new types of thought, which is pretty advanced for McKinley, don't you think? I mean, to me, it's like you don't think these people back then were thinking ahead because we look back at them. Yet he was. He had a pulse on the country. In fact, it was often said that he was so aware of what was happening in this country that he must have grasshoppers in his ear because he keeps his ear so close to the ground. And that was true. And here we see it all comes to a crashing end the following day, September 6, 1901, in Buffalo, New York. This is the day after the speech we just saw. He was at a receiving line when an anarchist named Leon Czolgosz, using the ruse of a hidden gun under a bandage, shot him point blank twice. Shot him once in the breast, upper chest, and once dead in the stomach. And it was chaos from that point on. McKinley was knocked over backwards, and his first concern was, don't hurt the guy, because they had jumped on the assailant trying to subdue him, which we'll see who did it here in a second. He also said, one of his other comments at that time was, please be careful how you tell my wife about this. So again, he's concerned about his wife as he's laying there bleeding to death from a bullet wound in the gut. So we see the assassin here in this imagery. This is a difficult moment in American history because people didn't understand this assassination attempt. At this point, it's still an attempt because McKinley lives a week after this moment. But they understood Lincoln. They understood John Wilkes Booth and motive and revenge. They understood Garfield too. They understood he was shot by a disappointed office seeker. This guy, Charlie Guteau, thought he was owed a job. And so that's why he shot Garfield. It was clear. This was not clear. Leon F. Czolgosz was a itinerant anarchist, occasional factory worker with not much going on, who basically thought that killing the president would be a good thing. He didn't have any idea, or any care about the next guy, Teddy. It wasn't to put Teddy in, like when Garfield was shot, Guteau yells, Arthur is now president. No, there was none of that. People just didn't get it because it was so unexpected, because McKinley was generally so well liked. So it wasn't a Democratic opponent. It wasn't a personal thing. It was just some random anarchist. And this was at a time in history where assassinations were prevalent. World leaders were killed every few years at this point. The King of Italy was killed just the previous year in 1900, King Umberto, by an anarchist. 1894, the president of France was killed by an anarchist. So this was a period of just killing for killing's sake. It wasn't really purposeful at all. Not that that's a good excuse. So anyway, we see a very quick trial for Czolgosz. He's executed within 2 months, and we see the demise of McKinley from gangrene. It was a infection within the stomach wound, which took his life. This is the hero of the moment. This is the man who jumped on Czolgosz to prevent further shooting. 2 bullets were fired out of a 6-shooter. There were 4 bullets in the chamber that did not get fired thanks to this man, local African-American porter, I believe he worked at a local hotel and just happened to be standing in line waiting for a handshake when he was there witnessing history, and was a local celebrity very briefly for his actions. The fact that McKinley died kind of made his actions less important, but he did prevent other people from getting shot, obviously, very, very clearly. So we see the death announced a week later. He had some rallying before his death, and then gangrene set in and he was gone. Teddy Roosevelt had to be summoned from a campsite in the Adirondacks, some unbelievably remote part of the world to be coming back from, but he makes it in time for his own inauguration. And the nation is truly in shock at this point. The nation again, the unexpectedness of this assassination is really the key part of the story. We understand assassination, but we didn't understand reasoning on this one, and we still don't. There's no explanation other than Czolgosz just wanted to kill a guy. And, we talk about him now because he did it, but to what purpose? Roosevelt taking over, as opposed to, say, Garrett Hobart had he lived, really did change the dynamic of the McKinley administration. Whereas McKinley's successor Hobart would have been probably more of a similar style leadership. You had Teddy blowing out memories of McKinley quickly because of his energy and his dynamic nature, the opposite of McKinley. They were not necessarily the opposites on many ends of the spectrum. They were both honorable people and very skilled politicians. But as far as their expressions go, couldn't have been more different. And so it seems like Teddy just obliterated the memory of McKinley without trying, just by being himself. But he did continue a lot of the things McKinley started, and McKinley gets very little credit for it today. So I like to say McKinley is our first modern president. I know people argue he's gotten a little more credibility recently in that department. We do have a legacy of McKinley in this country. Whether we choose to not acknowledge it or not, we have hundreds of McKinley schools, hundreds of McKinley avenues, parks, areas. There's a town of McKinleyville in California with a huge statue of William McKinley. It's just remarkable how he's impacted our country. And he's there. He's still there. And now we see more impact from the McKinley Nation. There I am modeling this shirt right here. There it is. McKinley Nation. And again, this we see here seems more almost like in jest. It's hard to believe there's actually a McKinley cult out there who really understands and studied his presidency and life and is so into him that they're sharing it. I'm that guy. It's hard to believe there's other people that are really trying to make money on this, but I think it's funny. I think it's kind of cool. And I think McKinley would approve because he was a capitalist. He's like, absolutely, you're not hurting anybody. Go ahead and make some money. Unfortunately, not everyone is going to feel the same about McKinley. His legacy with African Americans is not stellar. The one story I can share is in 1898 when the town of Wilmington, North Carolina was under siege from Klansmen or whatever you want to call them, white supremacists. The legally elected Black leadership appealed to the federal government for help, and McKinley refused, said it was a local problem, but it was way beyond a local problem because there wasn't any local help available, Bill. They needed federal help in that case, and he let them down. He also let down some postmasters who were attacked, some African-American postmasters who were under siege. He didn't lend support there either. So he had kind of that, hands off when he wanted to, as a president. He didn't stand up for everybody all the time. But I think within his context and his realm of the era he lived in, he wasn't all bad. I just love the nutritional lineup there with McKinley. Wow, that's strong. He's got a lot of over 100% there, as you can see. So I'm happy to continue with any questions anyone may have or what have you. Any questions for William?
There were some questions in the chat I want to get to, Chuck. That was incredible. Thank you. I wanted to just get to these before any new questions come in. Okay. Jan wants to know, will you have access to the recording? I did record this, and it has to be formatted so that you can view it. So once that's done, it's possible that we can put it on our YouTube channel, but at the very least, yeah, I can. I'll let you know. I'll let everybody know when those, if we can get that edited. I'll let you know, and then I'll send an alert to everybody that was on the call that if they want to view it again, and then people that missed it can see it. What is the history's position about President's assassination reason? Is it inconsistency with our esteemed presenter? I'm not really sure of the question. What is the history's position about, the President's assassination reason? Okay. Thank you for an excellent topic. How interesting. Correction. What is the history's position on the president's assassination motives? Does our president, I think you mean our presenter, agree with it? Or does our president agree with it? I'm not really sure.
Okay. Well, I think I expressed that the difficulty with this assassination for the nation was the lack of a motive, the vagueness of the reasoning for Czolgosz's actions. No one misunderstood Guteau or Booth. They were very clear. So this is a tough one because it wasn't like he had a better plan. It was anarchy is simply like chaos. Like all the leaders go away, but anarchists forget, oh, but somebody else is going to take over. You'd have to kill so many people if you're an anarchist who wants no leadership. It's impossible. It's ludicrous. So this is a popular trend at this time. Anarchism, socialism. Emma Goldman was a popular speaker at this time on socialism and socialistic topics, and he went to her speeches. So this was kind of a bit of a movement. And at the same time, I can understand, ideas and thoughts. What I don't understand is what was your replacement thought? What was your idea for a new kind of government? No government at all? It doesn't seem practical on any level, but not then or now, but whatever. This is, again, a tough assassination in that we still really can't accept a reasoning just because I felt like it. That was his reasoning.
Right. Jeff wants to know, was Thomas E. Dewey related to the admiral?
I don't believe so, but that's a fair question. That's worth looking into. Dewey was New York based, and you said George was born in Montpelier, Vermont. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. It's possible. I don't know.
A great slide embedded in the PowerPoint. Yeah.
I was going to say Dewey also was considered a presidential candidate. If as soon as McKinley got out of the way, not dying, but like when McKinley's second term was up, they were booming for Dewey in 2004. He would have been like, with Teddy, he would have been one of the leading candidates.
Yeah. No far out conspiracy theories that maybe no, not even close. There aren't any. There's nothing out there.
No, Czolgosz is really a loner. He admits to being a loner. There's no evidence he wasn't a loner. And he was executed by electric chair within 2 months of the assassination. So McKinley shot on the 6th of September. He dies on the 14th of September, and Czolgosz is dead by the end of October. They didn't waste much time because he admitted it. It was very point blank, clear. I did it. He didn't have even the grandiose stuff that Guteau had going, like taking pictures of his gun for posterity and he didn't, none of that. Just wanted to kill him. That's it.
Yeah. Did McKinley White House mark the turn of the century with any special celebration? Did the McKinley White House mark?
I don't know. That's a very good question. If so, I would imagine that it was probably pretty low key because the McKinleys were very low key in their White House doings. They often would have relatives over in the evening. They did prayer chats. They sang hymns occasionally. They got together with the Hobarts, but Garrett was dead by 1899, so he wouldn't have been part of that celebration. And Jenny Hobart, I got to mention her a little bit more. Jenny Hobart was a kind of a special advisor to President McKinley. Aside from her husband, she had an inside line on McKinley, so she was able to write him notes about people, her opinions, and he accepted them. He trusted her view on things. When, of course, her husband died, though, she retired back to New Jersey, and she became. This is amazing. She became the leading advocate in New Jersey against women's suffrage. She led the New Jersey Women's Anti-Suffrage Society, based out of Haledon, New Jersey.
Wow.
I didn't know any women were against voting, like they were fighting against the right. No, we don't want the right to vote. Stop, leave us alone. We don't want to right. No, she was. I don't know what her reason was.
Does Ivanka wear like Jenny Hobart T-shirt?
Maybe she knew, like, if women were going to vote, then it's just more futility or something. I don't really know what her reasoning was, but I do know her father's name. Her father's first name was Socrates, so that may tell you something. Yeah.
Joy wants to know, have you written, she'd love to read a book, any of your books you've written on this subject? Not yet.
No, but I possibly can dig out my thesis paper from a couple decades ago on McKinley, because it kind of covers a lot of what I've covered. I mean, I kind of, I like the certain things, then that I like now as far as what to focus on. So yeah, I can possibly dig that one out.
Yeah,
but I might do something new.
About the assassination, Shogarth was he was executed. So I think that answers Jen's question.
Yes.
Yes. And Jeff wrote that TR had him bumped off.
Wow, that's funny. That's funny.
And any other questions or comments?
You alluded to earlier McKinley's record with the Native Americans. I was just curious about that.
There's not a whole lot of activity going on at this time in the late 1890s. What I do know is that upon his death, a Native American group of four tribal elders, combined to send a memorial to Buffalo to the funeral site, and it's a touching tribute. They compare McKinley's leadership with Native Americans. They compare him to Lincoln and Garfield, specifically, or I'm sorry, I believe it was Grant and Garfield, specifically in their handling of Native American issues, meaning they only exercised power when they had to. They no excess use of power or force or. So again, from that perspective, the Native Americans seemed like they were also in mourning, so they were relating to the death of one of their own leaders, but they also seemed to show respect for the McKinley leadership during that period, given what the memorial said. Of course, memorials tend to be extra nice and not quite as honest, maybe, but that's the one reference I saw. There's not a whole lot of day-to-day Bureau of Indian Affairs material at this time.
Do you think, talking about conspiracies or talking about something that's probable, do you think that we blew up the Maine?
No, I believe it was a natural accident. It was a boiler explosion. They determined this in the 1950s or 60s to be the case. So what's interesting is that both Spain and the United States did investigations at the time in late February, March of 1898. And of course, Spain did not cooperate with us, and we weren't all that cooperating with them. But the Spain Naval Board found the internal source of the explosion, supposedly, but we didn't want to hear that. So we said the opposite. Our board said, no, this was a mine. Now, they did not say it was a Spanish mine, so there wasn't a direct finger pointing at Spain, but it was pretty much implied. Yeah, that's probably a Spanish mine, protecting the harbor. So it really got blown out of proportion quickly, and the war hawks loved it. It was Pearl Harbor. It was like, yeah, let's go. But it wasn't Pearl Harbor, because it would be like Pearl Harbor if Pearl Harbor never happened, or if it was an accidental plane crash that was said to be a kamikaze or something like that. So again, it certainly does begin the war efforts and the war spirit, but it's really not honest as far as a cause of war. It's an accident.
It's extremely convenient, though, that the battleship blew up when it did. We have never lost a capital ship in a foreign port, except for that, when we were desperately looking for an excuse for that war. And that ship made no sense to send that ship out there for anything but for a sacrificial lamb, because it was obsolete from the time it was launched, and it was extremely slow. And it was an embarrassment almost to the United States, to Maine. And the idea that we sent a ship that could be so easily defeated, especially since one of our major concerns was Spanish torpedo boats. And people at the time said that this is the one boat you're sending out there that would have no ability to defend itself. So it felt almost as if they sent it out there with the hope and prayer that the Spanish would attack it. And when they didn't, I think of things like the Gulf of Tonkin. Not necessarily that McKinley or Roosevelt said, "Hey, let's sink it," but they probably had the equivalent of black ops back then too. And the idea that, well, what we'll do is, someone down the line will make the decision. Let's blow it up. I mean, and a lot of the officers, the top brass, of course, were off the ship at the time. So the idea was that, the people that we don't want, the expendables will be on the expendable ship, but the people that we want to survive, they're having dinner on at the consul's house.
All very valid and fascinating points. If you want to take a look at somebody who might have been nefarious in this situation, look at the consul in Cuba at the time, Fitzhugh Lee. Fitzhugh Lee was adamantly trying to get intervention down there. And it was to the point where the Spanish kicked him out. He was just too much of a troublemaker down there. They wanted him recalled. He refused to be recalled. And so if anyone, I'm almost sure he is the one requesting the Maine to be there due to the exaggerated belligerent activity in Havana. So I'm pretty sure it was at his request it was sent. He was still, I believe, in his position at the consulship in Havana in January when they sent for it, or whenever it was, maybe late December. But look at him if you want to look at a conspirator. That would be the guy to look at. I think he might have been from the Confederacy. Not that that should matter, but, it's possible. A war hawk for sure.
And it's amazing, too, because they talk about the great victories we won during that war. But as you pointed out, Spain had no chance of winning that war. The Spanish fleets, some of them didn't even have their weaponry on the ships. And they were old and they were so decrepit that they couldn't even maneuver. It was just like the Manila Bay, it was a turkey shoot, just going back and forth.
To celebrate that really is embarrassing. It would be like, UCLA beating Montclair State in basketball. Like, is it real? Are you going to celebrate that? You probably should win that game. It shouldn't be close. So again, Spain knew, I think, going into, they were up against, impossible odds. This wasn't fought with any chance of victory, even from the beginning with Spain. Look, they were in peace negotiations during battles, knowing they had no chance to win. While Santiago was going on, and shortly thereafter, they were already saying, "Okay, we got to get out of this now. We're losing." So they knew they had very little chance. But again, the Filipino question always comes up as the sticking point of the storyline, because it wasn't discussed at all while Cuba was being discussed. No one said, "Well, but Spain also owns islands in the Pacific. What about them?" That was not discussed until the war was on, and then the question became, what do we do with these places? They're not like our continental states. The inhabitants are not like them. What do we do? It was just for resources. It was for coaling stations, for naval ports, and for, controlling resources.
That was interesting what you pointed out too about anti-imperialism. I always had heard about it and thought, well, anti-imperialism, they didn't want us to go around, swinging our power back and forth and doing bad things. When in fact, much of it was based upon a racist notion. We don't want to go into these countries and take over these individuals we consider lower than ourselves.
Yeah, it wasn't at the top of the headline as far as the anti-imperial leagues go, but it was certainly behind the scenes pretty clearly. Yeah, no question about it. And again, the anti-imperialist league was made up of often bitter Democrats who were shut out from the Bryan days. You had Cleveland as one of the, the former president, Grover Cleveland, one of the anti-imperialist league members. Bryan was a member. Bryan later became Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson and resigned as World War I was picking up. He was a pacifist. He was not about to stick it out for World War I. So, we know where his sentiments were, but a lot of the other members were college professors or regents, business leaders, some business leaders who thought that this was going to hurt their business by increasing certain kinds of supply, like, say, for example, sugar. You increase the sources for sugar, well, you're taking money away from those who are making all the money on sugar now. So again, there were very concerted kind of like, well, I'm okay with, we can let Puerto Rico in because they don't have anything competing with me, but I don't like that, Philippines, no. Like it became selective depending on, what what commercial interest was where in some cases too.
Follow the money.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but I missed the dates and the classes that you're going to have. The other two, what were they?
Yeah, I'm gonna. I was just gonna say that before we say goodbye to Chuck. Getting a lot of people are wanting to read your thesis and wanting to watch the recording. But we will. I'll try to get that out to you. In the meantime, we have to look forward to another talk with Chuck. It's 2 o'clock, not 3 o'clock, on February 27th. It's a Monday, 2 o'clock, and that'll be for African American History Month. That'll be the David Walker Appeal. We'll be talking about that. And then on the 27th of March, also at 2 o'clock, we'll be talking about Belva Lockwood. And she was the first woman to run for president. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe it was 1884. I'm not sure. 1884. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
So we have those to look forward to, and then we'll pick up the presidents again, and I guess in April, right? We'll just pick up where we left off.
Yep.
Are you going to pick up with Teddy Roosevelt?
Yeah.
Picking up with Teddy.
We're going to have to. Yeah. It's going to have to be like a 10-hour shift for you.
How do you do Teddy in an hour? You can't do Teddy in an hour.
We may have to do two parts.
I can find an hour's worth of things no one knows about Teddy, and maybe that'll work. I don't know.
Well, we'll work that out anyway. Thank you again, Chuck, for fascinating. We could literally, just let it roll, and
yes,
we really could. Anyway, I want to thank the audience. I want to thank Chuck for being here once again, and thank you for your thoughtful questions.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Chuck.